There's a moment right before everything falls apart when your hands make a decision your mind never agreed to. They close. Around a phone that hasn't rung back. Around a set of test results you've read 4 times. Around a doorknob you can't make yourself turn. That grip isn't a metaphor. It's a real physical thing your body does when it believes that letting go means losing. And 3,000 years ago, a group of temple singers in Jerusalem wrote a song about exactly that moment, the moment right before the world stops shaking. Buried inside one line of that song is a Hebrew word so physical, so specific, that once you understand what it actually says, you'll never read the phrase "be still" the same way again. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching this from. Drop your city and country in the comments. I read everyone, and I want to know how far this message is traveling tonight. Now, back to the smoke. The scene the singers are describing isn't peaceful. It's the aftermath of war. Bows snapped in half, spears broken into pieces, shields, leather, wood, hide, stacked and set on fire, the smell thick enough to choke on. Somebody just ended a war the only way this passage says it can end, by taking every weapon out of human hands and burning what's left. That's the moment this verse gets spoken into. Not a quiet morning, not a peaceful room with soft light. A battlefield still smoking, in front of people who just watched their whole world nearly come apart at the seams. Go back a few lines earlier in the song, and the noise gets even louder. The earth gives way beneath their feet. Mountains, the one thing an ancient people believed could never move, slide into the heart of the sea. Water roars and foams like something alive and furious. Nations shout at each other like storms colliding. This is not a gentle psalm. This is a song written by people staring directly at collapse. And into all of that noise, a single voice cuts through and says something that English has translated for 400 years as 2 quiet words. Be still. Here's the question almost nobody stops to ask. Still, how? Still like a lake with no wind? Still like someone forcing themselves to breathe slower during a panic attack? Or still like something else entirely? Something your English Bible never had the vocabulary to fully carry over? Because the word sitting underneath that English phrase isn't asking you to manufacture a feeling. It isn't asking you to calm your mind through sheer willpower while your entire life is on fire. The original Hebrew verb is doing something far more physical, far more specific, and, once you see it, far more urgent than relax. It's aimed at a part of your body you didn't even realize was clenched, and it was spoken directly into the worst moment these people had ever lived through, which means it wasn't a suggestion for a good mood. It was an order, one given to people who were still holding on for dear life when the words reached them. This song has a name attached to it that most people skim right past, and a history behind that name involving rebellion, judgment, and a family that should have been erased from Israel's story entirely, but wasn't. That detail matters more than it looks like it does, because the people who eventually sang this exact song, insisting they would not be afraid while mountains fell into the sea, descended from a man who was swallowed alive by the ground for defying God. Somehow, his family ended up leading worship instead of being buried by it. Keep that in the back of your mind. We're coming back to it. For now, sit inside the scene as it actually is. Weapons on the ground, fire still climbing. Smoke curling into a sky that, moments ago, sounded like the end of everything. And a voice, not gentle, not distant, but present, right in the middle of the wreckage, about to say something that has been misread as a mood for 4 centuries, when it was never a mood to begin with. It was aimed at your hands. And by the time we're done unpacking the word behind it, you'll understand exactly why letting go was never the same thing as giving up, and why the order to open your grip could only be given by someone who had already promised, in a language you haven't heard yet, that he would never open his. Picture your hands right now, at this exact second, doing something you're not even aware of. Maybe they're wrapped around a steering wheel a little tighter than the traffic requires. Maybe they're gripping the armrest of a chair in a waiting room, knuckles pale, while a name you're waiting to hear still hasn't been called. Maybe they're just resting on a phone, doing nothing, and yet somehow still braced, like letting go of the object would mean letting go of whatever you're hoping it tells you. That grip is not in your head. It's a real, measurable tightening in the muscles of your hand and forearm. And it turns out ancient Hebrew had a single word built entirely around describing exactly that sensation, and its opposite. The verb sitting underneath the phrase we translate as be still has almost nothing to do with volume or noise. Its root sense is about tension leaving a body. Specifically, it's the word ancient writers reached for when describing hands going limp, fingers uncurling, grip strength draining out of arms that had been holding on tight. Not a mood settling over a room, a physical release happening in a specific set of muscles. Which means the command buried inside this ancient song was never really shouted at the atmosphere around these people. It was aimed directly at their hands, at whatever they were white-knuckling in the middle of watching their world nearly collapse. And here's where it gets stranger, because this word shows up again and again across the Hebrew scriptures in moments that have nothing to do with quiet reflection. It appears when fear hits an army so hard, their weapons nearly slip from their fingers. It appears when a prophet tells a frightened city, essentially, don't let your grip fail now. Hold on, stay in the fight. Same root, pointed in opposite directions, which tells you something important. This was never a soft, poetic word reserved for temple songs. It was common enough, physical enough, that people understood it instantly, whether it meant collapse or courage. Which raises the question this whole song has been building toward, without ever answering it directly. If the command is aimed at hands, real, clenched, exhausted hands, whose hands are they? The soldiers who just lost the war? The frightened singers watching mountains slide into the sea? Or someone else entirely? Someone the text hasn't named yet? Because the verse doesn't just say stop holding on, it says stop holding on, and then know something. And that second part changes everything about what's actually being asked of you, because it means the point was never simply to calm down. It was to find something out. And what that something is will completely reframe every white-knuckled moment you've ever lived through. Here's a detail almost no one connects, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. The men who wrote this song weren't strangers to disaster. They came from a bloodline with a body count attached to it. A family whose ancestor once stood at the edge of a rebellion against the very leadership God had appointed, and paid for it in the worst way Scripture records. The ground itself split open and swallowed him alive, along with everyone standing beside him, gone, erased by every reasonable expectation of how these stories usually end. Except that's not where the story actually ends. Generations later, records from that same family show up again. Not buried, not forgotten, but standing guard at the doors of the temple, one of them baking the bread used in sacred offerings. The descendants of a man judged for grabbing power he wasn't given had somehow become the ones trusted with the innermost doors of worship. Doesn't that detail change how you hear the rest of this song? A family defined by refusing to let go, of ambition, of control, of a grip they had no right to, became the family that wrote a song commanding everyone else to open their hands. So when their descendants later stand in the temple and sing about the earth giving way, about mountains sliding into the sea, are they only describing chaos out there in the world? Or are they singing about something they inherited, a warning passed down through their own bloodline about exactly what happens when a human being refuses to loosen their grip? The song itself is built in 3 distinct waves, each one crashing louder than the last. Separated by a musical pause, scholars still argue over the exact meaning of. The first wave is cosmic, the ground failing, the sea roaring, everything solid turning liquid with fear. The second wave shifts entirely. Instead of a raging sea, there's a river, calm and life-giving, running through a city that historically never had one. Ancient Jerusalem sat on a hill with a single spring, nothing like the great rivers that fed Egypt or Babylon or Assyria. So why does this song insist there's a river flowing through it? Is it possible the writers weren't describing the city they were standing in, but the city they were promised? Because that same river shows up again, centuries later, in a very different book, flowing from beneath a temple threshold, growing deeper and deeper until it becomes impossible to walk across. The same image, repeated across Scripture, always meaning the same thing: God's presence turning chaos into something that gives life instead of drowning it. And then the third wave hits. No longer water, no longer earth, but human noise. Nations shouting, kingdoms falling. The exact same word used earlier for raging water gets reused here for raging armies, which means the writers wanted you to notice something unsettling. The chaos in nature and the chaos in human hearts are, in this song, described using the very same language, which leaves one question hanging in the air right before everything goes silent. If God can calm a sea with a single word, what does he do next when the noise isn't water anymore, but people? Here's the strange part historians still argue about. Some readers trace this exact scene back to a single night in Jerusalem's history, the year a massive Assyrian army, one of the most feared military forces on earth at the time, surrounded the city walls with no visible way out. And then, without a battle, without a siege breaking through, the threat simply vanished. Ancient records outside the Bible even hint at it, a devastating loss inside the enemy camp that forced a full retreat. No explanation given at the time made sense to the people living through it. One day, annihilation looked certain. The next morning, the field outside the walls was empty. The song never names that event directly, which means we can't call it proof. But it's hard not to feel the weight of it sitting underneath every line. So picture the scene the words are actually spoken into. Weapons litter the ground, useless. Smoke is still rising, and a voice cuts through everything, aimed at a crowd that just watched their own extermination reverse itself in a single night. Who exactly is that voice talking to? Ancient readers have debated this for centuries, and the honest answer is both sides at once. The command reaches outward toward the armies who nearly destroyed the city, telling them to stand down because they've already lost. And it reaches inward toward the terrified people singing this song, who are still shaking from watching their world almost end. The same four words land on the attacker and the attacked, which means whoever you are right now watching this, that instruction was built to reach you too. But notice the order events happen in, because this is the detail that changes everything. The weapons aren't broken after the command is given. They're already broken before anyone is told to let go. The fire is already burning. The threat is already finished. Which means this was never someone shouting, "Stop panicking," into an active disaster, hoping it would somehow help. The danger had already been dealt with by someone else before the instruction to release your grip ever reached your ears. That single detail is the difference between a command that sounds cruel and one that actually sounds like mercy. And then the second half of the line arrives, and it's stranger than it first appears. Know that I am God. Not believe. Not agree with. Know. A word ancient writers used for the kind of knowing that comes only through lived experience. The same word used for a farmer who understands his land after decades of planting it, or a shepherd who can pick his own animals out of a moving crowd without looking twice. Which means this verse isn't asking for a correct opinion held quietly in your mind. It's promising a kind of knowledge that cannot be taught, borrowed, or explained secondhand. The kind that only shows up on the far side of finally opening your hands. And that raises an uncomfortable question none of us like sitting with. What if the only way to actually know this for yourself is to first let go of the exact thing you're currently refusing to release? There's a reversal buried in this story that most people never catch, and once you see it, the entire command flips in meaning. Centuries after this song was first sung, a different leader stands at the edge of a river with an entire nation behind him and a war waiting on the other side. His predecessor is dead. Every reason in the world exists for his hands to be shaking right now, and the words spoken over him use the exact same root as the command in this song, except pointed in the opposite direction. Instead of being told to let go, he's given a promise. I will not let go of you. I will not loosen my grip on you. My hands will not go slack. Sit with that for a second, because it changes the entire shape of what's being asked of you. The very thing you're commanded to release is the exact thing God refuses to release when it comes to holding on to you. Your grip can open precisely because his never does. That's not a coincidence buried in ancient language. That's the entire argument of the song, hidden in a single shared word centuries apart. And if that's true, letting go was never about abandoning yourself to uncertainty. It was about finally admitting someone else already has a grip strong enough to hold what you can't. Ask anyone who's ever been caught in a rip current what their body wanted to do, and they'll tell you the same thing. Swim straight back toward shore, as hard and as fast as possible. It's the most natural instinct in the world, and it's also the exact thing that drowns people. A rip current is stronger than any swimmer alive, and fighting it head-on burns through your strength in minutes while the shore gets no closer. Every water safety expert teaches the opposite instinct. Stop pulling against it. Let the current carry you out, angle sideways instead of backward, and save your strength for the moment it finally releases you. The people who survive aren't the strongest swimmers. They're the ones who stopped fighting the thing that couldn't be beaten by force and let it run its course instead. If that image feels familiar, it should, because centuries later, in a small fishing boat caught in a storm, a group of terrified men find themselves in almost the exact same scene this ancient song describes. Roaring water, a boat filling fast, exhausted hands bracing for the end, and the one person on board who could actually calm it is asleep. When they wake him, panicked, the question they ask carries an edge sharp enough to cut. Don't you care if we drown? What happens in the next few seconds is the moment this entire ancient promise steps directly off the page and into real time. And it's coming next. Before we get there, if this is stirring something in you right now, tap like on this video. It genuinely helps this message reach someone else who needs to hear it tonight. He gets up. He doesn't call out to the men rowing, doesn't reach for a bucket to bail water, doesn't brace himself against the mast. He speaks directly to the wind and the sea, as if they were listening ears rather than blind forces of nature. And the water goes flat. Not calmer, flat. The same chaotic deep this ancient song describes as roaring, foaming, swallowing mountains whole, obeys a single voice, the way a frightened child finally goes quiet in a parent's arms. And the men in that boat, who had fished those waters their entire lives, are left holding a question the song had already answered centuries before they were born. Who is this? That even the wind and the waves do what he says. But the same command that calms a storm from the outside looks completely different when the storm is happening inside you. There's a garden, later, where the pressure isn't wind or waves. It's dread, sweat, a request whispered 3 separate times for a different outcome than the one coming. No calm lake, no peaceful sunrise. Just a man on his knees, asking God to change his mind, and then finally saying the words that are the fullest human shape of everything this ancient song was pointing toward all along. Not my will, but yours. That's what open hands actually look like when it costs you everything to open them. Not peaceful, not easy, just honest and surrendered anyway. So bring this down to where you actually live. Maybe it's a diagnosis you keep rereading, like the words might change if you stare long enough. Maybe it's an inbox you refresh at midnight, waiting for a job that hasn't called back. Maybe it's a child who's gone quiet, a marriage sitting in a silence neither of you knows how to name yet. Here's what letting go was never asking of you. It was never asking you to stop caring, stop trying, stop showing up. You still send the application, you still make the appointment. You still love the person who's hard to love right now. What it asks you to release is something smaller and heavier at the same time. The belief that the outcome was ever resting in your grip to begin with. It never was. And the tighter you've held it, the more exhausted you felt, because you were never strong enough to carry what was never yours to carry. That's the invitation sitting inside this ancient command. Not a mood to manufacture. Not a piece you have to fake until it becomes real. An open hand, held out honestly, towards someone who already promised his hands would never let go of you first. If this reached something in you tonight, don't scroll past it in silence. Tap like before you go. It's a small thing, but it puts this in front of someone else who might need to hear it exactly when you did. Leave a comment, even if it's just one word, even completely anonymous. Tell me what you've been holding on to, or simply what stood out to you tonight. And if you want more studies like this one, subscribe. It's free, it takes a few seconds, and it's genuinely how this message reaches the next person who's still standing in the smoke, wondering if anyone's coming.